Do you have the staff to be able to monitor your patch management system? Do you have the hours in the day to be able to do it? And that becomes some definite issues. One of the other things is that you've got systems that are connected to humans. The FDA regulates what patches you can put on those machines. The FDA cycle for patches is easily 6 to 8 months behind or a year behind patches that come from the vendor, say Microsoft.
So yeah, these are things I guess that we forget about when we think that the computer might be going inside a human's body.
Yeah, or be attached to a human, such as an insulin or a pump or something of the like.
Okay, well, we're going to head back upstairs and give you guys some more updates on the event. Paul and John?
Very cool. Thank you very much.
Now, speaking of medical supplies and whatnot, and keeping track of inventory and medical devices that get put in the body, lubrication is extremely important.
It is
I just wanted to make that point known to people out there that keeping track of that is of the utmost importance, in my opinion.
And I think that's one of the things that's actually available in the dispensaries, along with candy.
Yes, it is.
I have no idea what you can make from that, to be perfectly honest with you. So uptime, a little bit of update on scoring and uptime. So far, Howard, which is the team that was talking a lot of trash yesterday, is so far on top of the board, appears to actually doing very well with the uptime. Now, one of the questions that people were asking on Twitter, Paul, is we mentioned that the red team got access to the Linux systems far before they got access to the rest of the Windows computer systems. And a couple of people were asking, how exactly is that possible? Because I heard that Linux is far more secure than a Windows computer system. So, Paul, how exactly would someone go about doing that?
So, well, first let's talk about how most people think others get access to Linux systems. And one of the ways is, well, you know, there's this service, it's listening on a port, someone has written a remote buffer overflow for that exploits that listening service. And that's kind of like the old school hacker kind of way. People got kind of caught on to that over the past several years, and it's not so prominent anymore. One of the reasons for that is, one, just awareness. People are aware that if they have a service exposed and it's listening on the internet, that people are going to go ahead and compromise that system, so they've cut back on the number of services exposed to the internet. The second thing is the software itself has gotten a little better. People are more aware of coding in these errors that lead to so-called buffer overflows, which essentially let you gain control of the system. And the third thing is the operating system itself has become a lot more hardened, and the kernel can actually protect memory and prevent these kind of buffer overflow attacks. So what happens is, what I believe the red team has done, at least in our own assessments and working in this competition, that the ways you get into Linux systems are, one, weak passwords. And if you can just log into the system, I mean, why not? It's expected behavior on the system. Likely the system is not going to crash when you log into it. It gives you the access that you need, and you're off to the races.
And things like SE Linux won't impact that? Is that correct?
Well, no, that's expected behavior.
Yeah, that's expected behavior. They will not get in.
So one of the other things is web applications. So there's a web application running on top of a Linux system, and there are flaws inside of that application that give an attacker the ability to take over the entire system. All it takes is one small programming flaw inside of a web application, and you can essentially take over that system for good. In the demonstrations that I've got prepared for you for today and tomorrow, I'll actually show you how that works. Identifying the open ports, the services, the vulnerabilities, exploiting a web vulnerability to gain access to a system, which just gives you user-level control, and then what you do to escalate to so-called root-level control on that system. We've got a full demonstration for you using all kinds of different tools and techniques, both open source and from different vendors.
Now, with that attack approach, one of the things I think is very interesting that we were talking about before we got started today is how automation, especially in the privilege escalation arena on Linux computer systems, especially with some commercial tools and even some open source tools, doesn't always work the way it should. Do you think the red team is running into any of those problems with privilege escalation and getting root from like Apache level permissions on a web server moving up?
So most recently, I had this problem in my demonstration environment. There's a couple of problems there. Each system is configured differently. So you may have one system that's running a version of Linux, and they say, hey, we can give you the ability to escalate to administrator privileges. That's great, but it doesn't work. Well, why doesn't it work? there are so many different configuration options, different kinds of systems with different options available that may impact your ability to escalate privileges. Or it could be that there's a bug in the tool that you're using that you have to fix.
That
And
never
sometimes on
happens.
the fly, that can be a hard thing to do because you're not anticipating necessarily your first thought is, oh, I have a bug in my tool, but sometimes that's the case and you have to debug it. It's hard to debug against a live system that you're attacking. I always try to have a virtual machine that's pretty close to what I'm attacking and test my my exploits there. But that can be hard to replicate exactly what you're seeing on the system that you're attacking. So your tools can steer you wrong, certainly.
And I think that's one of the important things that people need to understand about network penetration testing, and right now what the red team is doing. Many people mistakenly believe that with red teaming and pen testing, it's a matter of just finding the right exploit and gaining access to the computer system. But as Paul discussed, it's really, really important that you know your environment and you have familiarity and comfort to be able to go into your tools, go into the code like you did with the Python script, and be able to modify it on the fly so it matches the target organization. So right now, if you take a look at what the red team is doing, if we could switch the camera over to the pit for the red team, you guys will take a look at what they're doing, and they're drinking a lot of Red Bull, they're eating a lot of candy, but they're
Listening to
very
lots of techno
intense. Lots of
music.
techno music.
Techno music is really a part of the culture. Of
It is, absolutely. Drum and
penetration
bass
test.
is what a lot of people like.
Yeah, yeah.
And right now what they're probably doing is they're spending a lot of time doing two things. One, trying to escalate privileges on the computer system. And two, trying to find ways that they can maintain access in a very sneaky sort of way. Because after a while, we're hoping, we hope, that the blue team will identify that their systems have been compromised, and they're going to start taking corrective action. So what are some interesting ways, Paul, that the red team may try to maintain access to the computer systems in such a way that it's more difficult for the blue team to identify them?
Well, there's a couple of simple things on Linux systems. You know, I have a background in Linux and Unix systems administration, so I really appreciate some of the methods that they've used there. So one of the things is in a Linux system, there are certain levels of trust, and you can trust users to different user accounts. So what will happen is red team will gain access to a system. They'll go inside the configuration, and they'll say, always trust this user, and they'll bury it in the SSH configuration, the secure shell configuration. The blue team will come in and say, oh my God, they created a user account and they did this, and they'll remove all that stuff. But they'll forget about the trust access that the red team has left inside of the root or most privileged account in a Linux system. Red team can just come back in anytime they want.
Absolutely. And some other things that we can do whenever we're doing penetration testing, and red teamers can do as well, is they can go through and come up with some very crafty backdoors. So some of the backdoors that we work on will actually do beacons, so it's not an established connection. So we can still get access, send commands to our backdoors, but it's making a series of HTTP GET requests that are very ephemeral. It won't be an established long-term connection. It just basically sends packets back and forth. Another interesting approach that we were talking about last night, I don't know if anybody from the red team actually remembered what we were discussing, is there's a technique that was kind of pioneered by Mark Beggett and Tim Tomes, or Landmaster53, also part of Paul.com, who basically identified that you can put malware in shadow volume copies on Windows computer systems. Now, shadow volume copies are there for restore points. So if anything goes wrong, you can restore back from the shadow volume copy. We can also put malware there. Now, the thing that's really interesting about this that we found at Paul.com with Tim and Mark's research was if you put malware into shadow volume copy, number one, it's hard to find. And number two, a lot of antivirus engines will leave it alone. A lot of AV products will not do anything to shadow volume copies because they don't want to corrupt the backups that are available. Any other ways that you can maintain access, not just, let's say, to the operating system, but is there a way that they can maintain access by getting access to the application like Apache, Paul?
I don't know what you speak of, John.
You did it last week.
Enlighten us.
So with a lot of systems, you may be able to get the user accounts out of the Linux box, but you can add users to the applications themselves. So whenever we're talking about removing default user IDs and passwords and removing user IDs and passwords that are unnecessary from the system, many times the blue teamers think that that's only about the operating system. But if you look at a lot of the other applications, for example, MySQL, you talk about MySQL has the ability that you can spool out files. You can use that to elevate and get a backdoor running on the computer system without actually having a user account. Apache, adding yourself to the htaccess file so that you can log into the application later. So even if the user account, or even if your backdoor has been removed, you still have a second or a third option for coming back into that computer system to maintain access for extended periods of time. And I really think if you look at what the red team is doing right now, they're focusing on entrenching themselves as deeply as they possibly can onto the blue team systems so that they can continue to take points, or excuse me, give points to the blue team system. And hopefully here after the next break, we're going to have a more accurate picture as far as what the point summary is. We haven't brought up the points yet because it's at the early stages of the game. It's very, very difficult to identify who's in the lead, who's catching up, because everybody right now is just scrambling to get their systems up and running and get their feet underneath them. One final thing before we actually break for the session, I think that this is really, really something that kind of highlights the importance of CCDC, is that blue teams have actually been helping each other. If they don't have passwords or if they're having trouble, you can actually see where blue teams are communicating with each other to share. And I think that that highlights one of the main goals of computer security going forward. It may not help them win points, but I think it'll help them win all special place in our hearts going forward. At least I wasn't expecting that. It is still a competition. So I believe that that's it for this particular section. Once again, we'll be resuming at the top of the hour every single hour. So if you come to the CCDC website, or if it's streaming from paul.com.com, you'll see every half an hour or so that we're playing music and you'll be seeing pictures of the competition. Stick around.
Also, previous year's videos
Yeah,
will be
previous
played
year's
as well.
videos will be played as well. So at the top of the hour, every hour, 9 to 5, Paul and I will be here with Larry and Charlie to give you a rundown of the events up until that point. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you at the top of the hour.
Thanks, everyone.